All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to a special birthday edition of the Optispan podcast. So it is true. Last week, I celebrated my 54th birthday. I actually feel pretty good about that number. I think, like most people, that would have seemed really old when I was in my 20s, but now it doesn't seem very old at all. And of course, I know that chronological age does not equal biological age. And I'm pretty confident that my biological age is actually much less than my 54 years of chronological age. So mostly I'm just really happy with the fact that I'm in better health today than I was 10 years ago. And I attribute that in large part to the fact that I stopped only studying longevity and actually started practicing longevity. And I do feel truly grateful for the circumstances and people that really helped me get on this new trajectory and health journey that I've really been on for the last few years. So in that vein, I thought I would share with you all some of the things that I think have had the biggest positive impact on my health in the last few years, in hopes that some of these may resonate and some of it may actually be useful as you're sort of tackling your own health trajectory. So kind of what I thought I'd do is put these into big buckets of the things that have had the biggest impacts. I'm pretty sure have had an impact, pretty sure haven't had an impact. And so to start with the things that really have had the biggest impacts, I would call these sort of level one. There are probably five or six. There are three that I would really put front and center. I think one I haven't spent a lot of time talking about is hormones. So after about 3 years, I feel like I finally got this dialed in about 5 months ago. And oh my God, probably the single most effective thing that I've done in the last couple of years to improve quality of life. And I definitely believe my sort of overall health status. So I'll go more into that journey because, again, I think especially, for a lot of men, really being thoughtful about your hormone health and approaching it from the right perspective, I think is super important. There are a lot of guys who get prescribed hormones who really haven't measured the biomarkers or really tried to dial it in. And then there are a lot of guys who just, ignore their hormone health. And just recently had an interview with Kevin White where we talk a bit about this as well. But regardless, super important thing to me personally for my quality of life, my health span. And like I said, I'll give a lot more detail on sort of my experience. I think there are some mistakes I made that people can learn from as well. Look for that in the next couple of months. Another thing that I put in this big bucket is, and I've talked about this before, just reducing the amount of alcohol that I was consuming. It's kind of obvious why that would have an impact on health, but I think for me personally, going from drinking pretty much every day to, maybe once or twice a month has had a huge impact in a variety of ways. Certainly the empty calories are part of it. I think the sleep quality is probably part of it as well. And then the other thing I'd put right up there with those two is leaving academia. And so for me personally, obviously that's sort of a unique situation, not going to apply to everyone, but for me personally, that had a huge impact on my physical and mental well-being and my stress level. And again, I'm just so grateful that I made that choice a couple of years ago now. And then in that same group, of course, I would also put exercise. And in particular, resistance training. So it's really been going on about 5 years now of consistent resistance training for me. And I would say the first few years, maybe a settling in period, a learning period. I hadn't really dialed in some of the other things. And so it was really only in the last, 18 months, I would say, that I really feel like I've seen the big impact in terms of body composition and how I feel and strength. And I think really that had a lot to do with getting diets and hormones dialed in as well. And again, really prioritizing the resistance training, being very consistent and sticking with that. I do plenty of cardio, but I'm not particularly intentional about the kind of cardio exercise that I do. I really do what I want to do. I get outside when it's not raining, love to go hiking. Sometimes I've talked about my wife and I will go do stair interval training outdoors. But I live in Seattle. We're in the rainy season now. And so in the winter, a lot of it's indoor. I do elliptical, maybe half an hour, 4 or 5 times a week, just to make sure I'm getting consistent cardio exercise. Could I be more intentional? Absolutely. Would I get more benefit from being more intentional? Probably, but I feel like it's working pretty well. And again, for me personally, and I think this is probably true for a lot of people, prioritizing the resistance training, building and maintaining muscle mass, I think has an outsized impact on health for a majority of adults. And then, the last thing I'd certainly put in this bucket is nutrition. And again, for me, this has been a pretty long journey. I wouldn't say I ate a terrible diet, but I certainly did not eat a healthy diet, 10 years ago. I'd say I really started playing around with low carb in late 2019. I tried keto in early 2020, maybe 6 months. I did really well on keto. I felt pretty good, but also that was pretty restrictive and certainly too restrictive for me. And so I kind of backed off, stopped really paying attention to the amount of carbs that I was eating, but really just focused on, cutting out simple sugars. So that's super important. Mostly focused now on whole foods. I eat a pretty high protein diet. I'd say I'm, somewhere around 190 grams per day. So that's about a gram per pound of body weight. I eat a pretty high fiber diet. I'd say I get over 40 grams of fiber pretty much every day. I've learned to absolutely love salads and vegetables. And again, I would have never thought that I would be that guy 10 years ago. But I do have to say, I think, it is true. Your taste buds will change. Your preferences will change. I think especially as you cut out a lot of the highly processed stuff and a lot of the simple sugars. And honestly, now I don't really want that kind of food. And when I go out to eat, I typically gravitate towards salmon salad, sometimes a steak salad, and exploring a variety of different types of healthy food. So, and again, I think, there are some really simple sort of strategies to take that can be super effective. I mentioned the simple sugars. That's got to be number one. Like, just read the labels. Again, I think this idea of shopping around the outside edge of the grocery store, really good rule of thumb. And then, a couple things that I've found, and maybe we'll learn there's something wrong with keto bread one of these days, but it seems like a pretty good option if you like bread. I now eat keto bread, 4 or 5 times a week for sandwiches. Sometimes I'll put tuna fish in there, sometimes chicken, sometimes turkey. They got a lot of fiber and no added sugars. So it seems like a win if you like bread, and it's pretty easy. And then I also eat a fair amount of kind of high protein, no added sugar yogurts, and there's a bunch of brands out there. I right now have been enjoying, I think it's Dannon Light and Fit. There's a vanilla that has like 90 calories and 14 grams of protein, or I like the coconut too. But you can find your own. I think the point is to really move towards foods that don't add extra sugar. And that can be really hard to find, but read the labels. And then I think, protein bars, I've sort of had an on-off relationship with protein bars. I now do have protein bars once in a while. Again, I think they can be a useful tool to kind of fill you up. But you got to read the labels. Some of them actually still have a lot of added sugars. And I would just say, don't become too reliant on them. I think, we can fall into this pattern of like, all processed food is bad. Never eat processed food. Obviously, protein bars are processed foods. But I think, somewhere in the middle, use it sparingly, but don't make that, the staple of your diet would be the way that I would think about it. And I'm sure I will continue to learn and evolve as time goes on. And then I guess maybe the last thing I'd put in this, level one bucket, the biggest impact things for me have been sort of this, exploration and learning journey around, my own personal health and utilizing preventative diagnostics, biomarkers. And then I would put in that same category, finding a really good doctor. And that can be tough. I recognize that. But there are a lot of good doctors out there who really are evidence-based, rigorous, focused on preventative healthcare, medicine 3.0 doctors, as Peter Attia would say. I think our docs at Optispan, fall in that category for sure, and some of the protocols we're developing. And then I personally have had Dr. Kevin White from Prime Health Associates, based out of Oklahoma City, on the show a few times. Kevin's fantastic. He's actually my personal doc. And I think the kinds of things that we talk about on the podcast in terms of diagnostics, comprehensive blood work, DEXA, ultrasound, cancer screening, really actionable things that can help you really figure out where you're at, if you have a pre-existing condition that needs to be fixed. And then, as you go along, by monitoring biomarkers, figure out whether what you're doing is really working for you. Are you seeing body composition go in the right direction? Are you seeing the blood-based biomarkers go in the direction that you think they need to go and your doctor thinks they need to go? So that's really what I would put in that top category. And then kind of next level down would be things that I think have a smaller impact, but probably have still been important. And certainly I would put rapamycin in this bucket. Can I prove that rapamycin has improved my health? I mean, I can't prove it. I'm pretty confident based on my experience with rapamycin improving my frozen shoulder in a very rapid way. I'm pretty confident that was due to the drug. That had a big impact on my quality of life. That was back in 2020. Again, I've talked about that on the podcast. That definitely had a big impact. And then since then, I've cycled rapamycin multiple times. Can I say with confidence that it's had, big health positive effects since then? Nope. Mostly just a perception that every time I cycle rapamycin, it knocks down the inflammation, knocks down the aches and pains. I think it may have helped maintaining lean mass, but I can't prove that. I do believe it's having a positive impact, and so I certainly put it in the bucket of it's not as big as, diet, exercise, hormones, other stuff that I had in that top bucket, but I'd kind of put it that next level down of important, at least for me personally. I'd also put creatine in this bucket. I actually been off creatine for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. Plan to start taking it again. When I first started taking it a few years ago, I definitely felt like I noticed an increase in strength and exercise performance. I think it's probably real, but again, really not to the same magnitude of effect or certainty that I have for those things that I would put in that top bucket of largest impact. I'd also put continuous glucose monitoring in this sort of second level down. I personally, like many people, have found this to be a very useful tool, both for learning, how my body responds to different foods and then getting diet dialed in. And I still periodically, I don't know, maybe once every 6 months, come back and do a couple weeks of CGM. Every time I do it, reinforces things or I learn new things. So I find that to be a pretty useful tool that I would say has contributed to certainly my positive health journey. And then kind of next level down, I guess I'd call this probably useful. And I mean, there may not be a lot of separation between level 2 and level 3. This is where I would put vitamin D and omega-3, which I do take most days as a supplement. Again, I do that because I can measure it. I know I was deficient. I can supplement into what I believe is the optimal range, and I can keep myself there. And I can't say with a high level of confidence that I've noticed, big changes in how I feel or anything like that. But we know that being deficient in either of those things is associated with a whole bunch of bad stuff. And it's pretty easy to get dialed in. So obviously I'm going to keep doing it, but I can't say with confidence that, it's having a huge impact on my health. It just seems like a pretty good insurance policy, something worth doing. And then I guess I would move on to the things that I personally, again, have found not to be particularly useful. So it doesn't mean that they can't have health benefits for some people or even that they couldn't have health benefits for me, but I've tried them and haven't really felt like they moved the needle for me at all. So I'd put in this bucket urolithin A. I took urolithin A supplement for several months, didn't notice anything. Again, doesn't mean it didn't do anything. I just didn't notice anything. Same thing with nicotinamide riboside. Really no notable effect for me. I'd also put DHEA in there. So DHEA is a precursor of steroid hormones. Some people think that if you take DHEA, you can boost things like testosterone. Again, I didn't really notice anything, at least long-term with DHEA. That seems to be the consensus. Maybe some women can get a boost in testosterone from DHEA. I didn't notice anything. And again, I'll talk more about that when I talk about my personal hormone journey. Also took boron for a while. There's some literature, it's not great, some literature that boron can reduce a protein called sex hormone binding globulin. This is a protein that binds to testosterone and other sex hormones. My SHBG was high, and so I thought maybe taking boron would help. It didn't do anything. So it doesn't mean it couldn't work for some people, but didn't work for me. And then also in this probably not useful category, I would definitely put the epigenetic age tests. In fact, I would say those are definitely not useful. And I'd put microbiome tests in there as well. I personally haven't found microbiome tests to give me any actionable or informative information. So I think those are largely a waste of money right now. And, I talked about biological age tests previously. I'll certainly talk about them more on the podcast. Don't recommend those at all. So then the last thing is, this is probably the most important thing for my health, is personal relationships. I think without quality human relationships, I really don't believe that you can have a high quality of life. I'm sure some people would disagree with that, but I think for most people, having human relationships is what makes life worth living. And so I am amazed and grateful that the most important relationship in my life is the relationship I have with my wife. This year, 2025, will be our 25th wedding anniversary. So Tammy, I love you. And I just feel so fortunate to be able to spend every day with my best friend. I know not everybody has that, but all of us should have these really important relationships and try to nurture those relationships. So for me, relationships in general and the relationship with my wife, absolutely the most important factor for my health. So going forward, I'm not really anticipating any big changes in my routine, at least not right away, but you never know what's going to come. I'll, of course, continue to evaluate new data, pay attention to how I feel, pay attention to my biomarkers, tweak things as I go. And I do have a few things I want to try out in the next 6 months to 12 months. I'm sort of intrigued by. So one of these is the TRIM protocol, the thymus regeneration, immunorestoration, and insulin mitigation protocol that was developed by Greg Fahey. So I was able to go and visit with Greg recently. We'll have a podcast episode either out or coming out soon, depending on the order that these things are released, with Greg, where we do a really deep dive into TRIM. And I learned a lot of really interesting stuff. I was intrigued by TRIM before I had a chance to sit down with Greg. And then after that conversation, I'm even more convinced that I want to give it a try. So I probably will do that. I don't know if I'll start in April or May or June. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to do an MRI before and after to actually see structurally what happens to the thymus. And so again, Greg and I talked about this in detail, but a couple of things should happen if there is actually thymic regeneration. There should be a change in the morphology, so the volume of the thymus, but even more importantly, a change in the composition, which you can see by MRI. What I learned is that with thymic involution, there is an infiltration of fat into the thymus, and that the TRIM protocol, you actually see that fat decrease. There are also some immune markers that we'll probably look at to see functionally whether it's having an effect on the immune system. So anyways, excited about that. Want to give that a try. The other thing I'll probably try in the next couple of months is the Clearly test. So Clearly is a test that utilizes artificial intelligence tools in combination with a coronary CT angiography. And this is done to evaluate plaque buildup in the arteries. One of the cool things about Clearly is it allows you to measure both hard and soft plaques. I haven't done any tests to look at plaque burden, so something I should do. I kind of expect that I'll find some just based on family history and some of my prior lifestyle choices. So I'll probably have an upcoming episode on that and document the whole process, hoping to do that sometime in April or May. So probably do both of those things, and then we'll see what else 2025 brings. My goal, honestly, is to be in better shape at 64 than I am at 54. I feel like at 54, I'm in better shape than I was at 44, which is great. I know doing that 10 years from now is going to be a pretty heavy lift, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think if you don't go for it, you're not going to achieve it. So I'm going to go for it. And I just, try to remember that aging doesn't have to be something that happens to us. It can and should be something that we engage with, we shape, we try to optimize. Again, I don't know exactly what my health is going to look like when I'm 65 or 75 or 85 or 95 or 105, 115, 125, 135. I don't know. But I do know that we all have a big say in it. And so I would want to encourage you, like me, to take control of your own health as best you can and make the most of the time that we've got. So that's it. I hope you have found this valuable. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you're not yet a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. Be sure to check out our newsletter. It is awesome. We've had 2 releases of the newsletter so far. You can go to the website optispan.life and sign up for the newsletter. There'll be some stuff in there that we don't talk about on the podcast that you don't want to miss. So be sure to check that out. And I hope to see you next time on the podcast.